The evening sun cast long shadows across the Tower of London as Guardsman Michael Patterson took his position for the final ceremonial watch of the day. At 24, he had served 3 years with the Grenadier Guards and had developed a deep appreciation for the historical significance of his role, protecting one of Britain's most iconic landmarks. The steady stream of tourists was beginning to thin as closing time approached. But dozens of visitors still lingered to capture photographs of the famous red-coated sentries. Among the departing crowd was Danny Walsh, a 31-year-old unemployed mechanic whose day had started badly and gotten progressively worse. He had been drinking since noon at a nearby pub, drowning his sorrows in cheap lager while nursing grievances against everyone he blamed for his current circumstances. The rejection letter from his latest job application sat crumpled in his pocket, and his landlord's eviction notice weighed heavily on his mind. Danny's path through life had been marked by poor decisions and violent outbursts that had cost him relationships, employment opportunities, and eventually his freedom when he served 18 months for assault. The anger management courses mandated by his probation officer had done little to address the deep-seated rage that seemed to consume him. Whenever alcohol loosened his already limited self-control, Michael stood at attention near the entrance to the White Tower. His Lenfield rifle held with practiced precision while tourists took pictures and children pointed excitedly at his impressive uniform. His bearskin hat added to his imposing height, and the red tunic with its distinctive brass buttons gleamed in the fading daylight. To most observers, he represented the pageantry and tradition of British military ceremony. But Michael's background extended far beyond ceremonial duties. Before joining the Guards, he had served 2 tours with the Parachute Regiment in Afghanistan, where he had earned commendations for courage under fire and leadership during difficult operations. His selection for ceremonial duties was based not only on his military record, but on his ability to maintain composure and represent the highest standards of professional soldiering. The crowd around the tower included families finishing their day of sightseeing, history enthusiasts studying the ancient fortress, and groups of international tourists marveling at the living history they were witnessing. Most visitors showed appropriate respect for the Guards and the significance of their role, but occasionally someone would test boundaries or behave inappropriately. Danny had been asked to leave the tower grounds twice during the afternoon for arguing with staff and disturbing other visitors. His intoxicated state and increasingly aggressive behavior had drawn the attention of security personnel, but he had complied with their requests to move along rather than escalate the situation. However, he had not actually left the area, instead lingering in nearby streets and continuing to drink while his resentment festered. The bottle in Danny's hand was the remnant of his latest purchase from a corner shop, nearly empty now but still containing enough beer to fuel his growing anger. His unfocused gaze fixed on Michael's motionless figure, and in his twisted thinking, the Guard became a symbol of everything he felt was wrong with society: privilege, authority, and respect that he believed he had been denied. As closing announcements echoed across the tower grounds, most visitors began making their way toward the exits. Parents gathered their children, tour groups reassembled, and the normal and Doveday activities proceeded peacefully. But Danny was moving against the flow of departing tourists, his steps unsteady, but his intent becoming clearer with each passing moment. Security cameras, positioned throughout the historic site, captured his approach, but the operators were focused on managing the orderly departure of legitimate visitors rather than tracking one obviously intoxicated individual who appeared to be leaving like everyone else. The shift change for security personnel was also beginning, creating a brief window of reduced attention just as Danny's presence was becoming most dangerous. Michael maintained his ceremonial position, aware of the departing crowds, but trained to focus straight ahead regardless of distractions or activities around him. His peripheral vision caught movement and noise, but nothing that immediately suggested a threat requiring his attention. The end of his duty shift was approaching, and he looked forward to joining his colleagues for their evening meal and debriefing. Danny's approach toward Michael was erratic and aggressive, drawing concerned glances from the few remaining tourists who were still taking photographs. His grip on the beer bottle tightened as he muttered incoherently about unfairness and injustice. His words slurred, but but his intent becoming increasingly clear to anyone paying attention. The remaining visitors included an elderly couple from Germany who had been admiring the historic architecture, a young mother with her teenage daughter capturing memories of their London vacation, and several other tourists who were finishing their photography sessions before the tower closed for the evening. None of them expected to witness anything more dramatic than the traditional ceremony they had come to observe. Michael's training had included extensive instruction on dealing with various types of disruptions while maintaining ceremonial protocol. Drunk tourists, overly enthusiastic visitors, and even occasional protesters were all part of the job, and guards were taught to remain in position unless faced with genuine threats requiring defensive action. His combat experience in Afghanistan had sharpened his ability to assess danger levels while appearing completely focused on ceremonial duties. But Danny's behavior was escalating beyond the typical disruptions that guards were trained to ignore. His movements were becoming more purposeful despite his intoxicated state, and the bottle in his hand was being held less like a drink and more like a weapon. The few tourists who noticed his approach began moving away instinctively, sensing that something was wrong. "Look at you," Danny slurred loudly as he came within 10 feet of Michael's position, "standing there like you're better than everyone else, like you matter more than the rest of us, right?" Michael's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, but his peripheral vision tracked Danny's movements, while his mind rapidly assessed the developing situation. The man was clearly intoxicated, agitated, and carrying what could potentially be used as a weapon. Protocol dictated maintaining position unless directly threatened, but Michael's combat instincts were beginning to override ceremonial training. The elderly, German couple noticed Danny's aggressive posture and began moving toward the exit, their vacation photos forgotten in favor of personal safety. The mother with her daughter also recognized the potential danger and guided her child away from the area. While discreetly reaching for her phone to call security, Danny took another step closer, raising his voice so that everyone in the vicinity could hear his rambling complaints about society, unemployment, and what he perceived as the unfairness of his life. His grip on the bottle shifted, and experienced observers would have recognized the change from casual holding to preparation for violent action. Security personnel, who had been managing the end of the day closure procedures, began receiving reports about the disturbance, but their position at the main gates made it difficult for them to respond immediately. The tower's size and the need to coordinate the departure of legitimate visitors meant that reaching Michael's position would take precious minutes that might not be available. Michael's military experience included extensive training in threat assessment and escalation recognition. The approaching man exhibited all the classic signs of someone preparing to commit violence: aggressive posturing, verbal threats, and most importantly, the transformation of a beverage container into a potential weapon through his changed grip and stance. "You think you're special because you wear that uniform?" Danny continued, his voice getting louder and more hostile with each word. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything, to have nobody respect you, to be treated like garbage by everyone." The last few tourists in the immediate area were now backing away or actively seeking security personnel, recognizing that they were witnessing something that had moved beyond verbal confrontation into potentially dangerous territory. Phone cameras that had been recording ceremonial duties were now capturing what appeared to be a developing assault on a member of the Queen's Guard. Danny's final approach covered the remaining distance between himself and Michael in 3 quick steps, his movements fueled by alcohol-induced rage and years of accumulated resentment. The bottle rose above his head as he closed the gap, and Michael's training and combat experience converged in a moment of decision that would test everything. He had learned about duty, restraint, and appropriate response to civilian threats. The beer bottle connected with the side of Michael's bearskin hat with a sickening crash, the glass shattering against the ceremonial headpiece and sending fragments cascading across the stone courtyard. The impact was brutal and unexpected, causing Michael to stagger slightly, but not fall as Danny had anticipated. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. The German couple cried out in shock, while the mother shielded her daughter's eyes from the violent scene. Several tourists who had been filming the ceremony continued recording, their cameras now capturing something far more serious than traditional pageantry. The sound of breaking glass echoed off the ancient stone walls of the tower, followed by gasps and shouts from the horrified witnesses. But what happened next defied everyone's expectations, including Danny's. Instead of collapsing or retaliating with violence, Michael Patterson demonstrated the remarkable self-control and professionalism that had earned him selection for ceremonial duties. Despite the blow to his head and the glass fragments embedded in his hat and uniform, he maintained his composure and assessed the situation with the cool judgment of an experienced soldier. Blood trickled down Michael's face from cuts caused by flying glass, staining his red tunic, but his eyes remained alert and focused. His military training had prepared him for far worse injuries under combat conditions. And while the attack was shocking in this ceremonial context, it was not incapacitating. More importantly, his years of service had taught him the difference between responding appropriately and escalating unnecessarily. Danny stood frozen for a moment, surprised that his attack had not produced the dramatic result he had expected. In his alcohol-impaired thinking, he had imagined the guard would either fall helplessly or respond with overwhelming force, giving him grounds to claim victimization. Instead, he faced a professional soldier who was clearly injured but remained in complete control of the situation. "Sir," Michael said in a calm, authoritative voice that carried clearly across the courtyard, "you need to step back in place. Your hands where I can see them. Security personnel are on their way, and this situation can still be resolved peacefully." The contrast between Danny's wild aggression and Michael's measured response was striking to everyone who witnessed it. Here was a man who had just been violently attacked, bleeding from glass cuts, yet still attempting to de-escalate the situation rather than respond with the overwhelming force his training would have allowed him to use. Security personnel were, indeed, rushing toward the scene, their radios crackling with urgent communications about the assault on the guardsmen, but their position at the main entrance meant they would need another minute to reach the location, during which Michael would need to manage the situation alone while protecting both himself and the remaining civilians in the area. Danny's confusion about the guard's response quickly transformed back into rage, as he realized his attack had failed to produce the desired effect. He still held the broken neck of the bottle, its jagged edges now forming a more dangerous weapon than the original container had been. His intoxicated mind saw Michael's calm response as mockery rather than professionalism. The remaining tourists continued backing away, but their movement was limited by the tower's architecture and the various barriers designed to protect historical areas. Several people were now actively calling for help on their phones, while others continued recording what was becoming an extraordinary demonstration of military discipline under extreme provocation. Michael's peripheral vision tracked the approaching security personnel, while his primary attention remained focused on Danny and the broken bottle he still wielded. The guard's combat experience had taught him that wounded and cornered aggressors could be extremely dangerous, especially when under the influence of alcohol and operating under impaired judgment. "You think you're better than me?" Danny screamed, waving the broken bottle erratically, standing there all calm like nothing happened. "I'll show you what it feels like to be hurt." But Michael's response continued to defy expectations. Instead of preparing for combat or calling for assistance, he did something that stunned everyone present. He began speaking to Danny with genuine concern and empathy, recognizing that behind the violence was a human being in obvious distress and pain. Michael's next words surprised everyone in the courtyard, including the security personnel who were now close enough to hear the conversation. Instead of issuing commands or threats, the bleeding guardsman spoke with unexpected compassion too. The man who had just attacked him? "I can see you're hurting," Michael said, his voice steady despite the blood running down his face. "This isn't really about me, is it? Something's gone wrong in your life and you're looking for someone to blame." Danny froze, the broken bottle still raised threateningly, but his expression shifting from rage to confusion. He had expected retaliation, arrest, or at least anger from his victim. The last thing he had anticipated was understanding and empathy from someone he had just violently assaulted. The crowd watched in amazement as the scene continued to unfold in completely unexpected ways. Instead of the violent confrontation they feared, they were witnessing something remarkable, a demonstration of how training, maturity, and genuine human compassion could transform even the most dangerous situations. Security officers had reached the perimeter of the incident but held their positions as they assessed the guards' handling of the situation. Their training emphasized not interfering with ongoing de-escalation efforts unless absolutely necessary. And Michael's approach was clearly having an effect on the attacker's behavior. "You don't know anything about my life," Danny replied, but his voice had lost much of its earlier venom. The guard's unexpected response had disrupted his alcohol-fueled narrative about enemies and persecution, forcing him to confront the reality of what he had just done. Michael took a careful step forward, ignoring the glass fragments crunching under his boots. His military experience included extensive training in dealing with traumatized civilians, and he recognized the signs of someone whose aggression masked deeper pain and desperation. "You're right, I don't know your specific situation," Michael acknowledged. "But I've served with soldiers who came from difficult backgrounds, men who felt like the world had given up on them. Some of them found their way back from dark places. There's always another choice, even when it doesn't feel like it." The broken bottle in Danny's hand began to lower as the guard's words penetrated through his intoxicated haze. The rage that had sustained his attack was being replaced by something more complex: shame, confusion, and the dawning realization of what he had done to an innocent person. Tourists continued recording, but their phones now captured something unprecedented. In the history of royal ceremonial duties, social media would later struggle to categorize the footage. Was it an assault, a rescue, a therapy session, or something entirely new in the annals of conflict resolution? The elderly German couple had stopped their retreat and were watching with fascination as the guardsman continued his patient engagement with his attacker. The mother and daughter, while still maintaining a safe distance, were equally transfixed by the unexpected turn the situation had taken. "I lost my job," Danny said suddenly, his words barely audible. "My girlfriend left me. I'm going to lose my flat. Everything's falling apart, and I just wanted someone else to feel as bad as I do." Michael nodded with genuine understanding. Blood still trickling from his injuries, but his attention completely focused on the man before him. "I've been there," he said quietly. "It's not the same circumstances, but that feeling of everything falling apart at once. It's like drowning in your own life." Security personnel exchanged glances, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Their protocols covered many scenarios, but a wounded guardsman providing counseling to his attacker, while still on duty, was not something their training manuals had addressed. The broken bottle slipped from Danny's fingers and shattered further on the stone courtyard, the sound marking a crucial turning point in the confrontation. Without the weapon, he was no longer a threat, but more importantly, his aggressive posture had dissolved into something much more vulnerable and human. "Why are you being nice to me?" Danny asked, tears now mixing with the alcohol and confusion. In his voice, "I hurt you. I attacked you for no reason. You should hate me." Michael wiped blood from his face with the back of his hand, his red tunic now stained with glass fragments and crimson streaks. But his expression remained patient and understanding as he looked at the broken man before him. "Hating you won't help either of us," Michael replied simply. "I've seen what hate does to people, both in combat and at home. It destroys the person carrying it more than anyone else." Danny collapsed to his knees on the cold stone courtyard, the fight completely gone out of him as the reality of his actions crashed down through his alcoholic haze. The tourists watched in stunned silence as the man who had moments before been a dangerous attacker was now sobbing openly in front of the guard he had assaulted. Security personnel moved closer but remained at a respectful distance, recognizing that Michael's approach was achieving something that force and arrests could never accomplish. Inspector Janet Morrison, the senior security officer on duty, had 30 years of experience dealing with various incidents at historic sites. But she had never witnessed anything like this. "I'm sorry," Danny whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did that. I'm not usually... I've made mistakes before, but this..." He gestured helplessly at Michael's injuries and the broken, glass scattered around them. Michael carefully removed his damaged bearskin hat, revealing additional cuts on his scalp where glass fragments had penetrated. The sight of his injuries made several tourists gasp, but the guardsman seemed more concerned about his attacker's emotional state than his own physical condition. "Sorry is a start," Michael said, sitting down on a nearby stone step to bring himself closer to Danny's eye level. "But words alone won't fix what's broken in your life. You need to want to change, really want it, not just because you got caught or because you're feeling guilty right now." The crowd had grown larger as word of the incident spread, but the newcomers arrived expecting to see arrests and confrontations. Instead, they found an extraordinary scene of reconciliation playing out in one of Britain's most historic locations. Phone cameras captured every word and gesture, creating a record that would challenge many people's assumptions about justice and forgiveness. Paramedics arrived and approached carefully, unsure whether their patient was the bleeding guardsman or the collapsed civilian. Michael waved them toward Danny first, recognizing that alcohol poisoning and emotional breakdown could be just as dangerous as his own cuts from flying glass. "He needs medical attention," Michael told the paramedics. "Severe intoxication and possible alcohol poisoning. I can wait a few minutes." Inspector Morrison approached Michael while the paramedics assessed Danny's condition. "Guardsman Patterson," she said formally, "are you able to provide a statement about what happened here?" Michael looked at Danny, who was now receiving medical care while continuing to mumble apologies and expressions of regret. "He's a man who's lost his way," Michael said carefully. "He made a terrible decision while under the influence, but I don't believe he's a threat to public safety. He needs help more than he needs punishment." The inspector raised an eyebrow at this assessment from the victim of what would normally be classified as a serious assault. "The incident was recorded by multiple witnesses," she pointed out. "Charges will need to be filed regardless of your personal feelings about the matter." Danny overheard this exchange and struggled to sit up, despite the paramedics' efforts to keep him still. "No," he said with surprising clarity. "Don't let me get away with this because he's being kind. I attacked him. I could have killed him. I need to face consequences, or I'll never change." Michael and Danny's eyes met across the courtyard, and something passed between them that the watching crowd couldn't fully understand. It was a moment of mutual recognition, one man acknowledging his need for accountability, and another recognizing the courage that such acknowledgement required. The tourists who had witnessed the entire incident began sharing their recordings with news outlets and social media platforms, but many also lingered to see how the story would conclude. They had come to see history and tradition at the Tower of London, and instead had witnessed something that might prove more historically significant than any ceremonial display. 8 months after the incident at the Tower of London, Michael Patterson sat in a community center in East London, leading a support group for veterans struggling with civilian life transitions. The small scars on his face from the glass fragments had faded to thin white lines that were barely visible unless someone knew to look for them. But the impact of that evening had shaped the direction of his life in ways no one could have predicted. Danny Walsh sat in the circle of chairs, marking his 6th month of sobriety and his 4th month attending the group sessions. The court had sentenced him to 18 months in prison, suspended on condition of completing alcohol treatment, community service, and regular counseling. But more importantly, he had chosen to continue attending Michael's veteran support group. Even after fulfilling his legal obligations, the relationship between the two men had evolved far beyond victim and perpetrator into something more complex and meaningful. Michael had testified at Danny's sentencing hearing, speaking not about punishment but about the potential for redemption he had witnessed in those crucial moments after the attack. The judge, impressed by both men's maturity and commitment to positive change, had structured a sentence focused on rehabilitation rather than retribution. "Tonight we're talking about accountability," Michael said to the group of 8 men and 2 women. All former service members dealing with various challenges in civilian life, not just acknowledging mistakes, but taking responsibility for fixing the damage they cause. Danny had become an unexpected asset to the group, offering a civilian perspective on the struggles that many veterans faced when transitioning out of military service. His experience with unemployment, relationship failure, and substance abuse resonated with several group members who were dealing with similar issues. The incident at the tower had been extensively covered in media, with the footage viewed millions of times across various platforms. But rather than focusing on the violence or the unusual response, most coverage had emphasized the power of compassion and the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest moments. Michael had received numerous commendations for his handling of the situation, including a personal letter from the colonel of the regiment, praising his demonstration of the highest values of military service, but he was most proud of the letter he had received from Danny's estranged brother, thanking him for seeing humanity in someone that everyone else had written off as hopeless. The Tower of London. It installed a small plaque near the location where the incident occurred, not commemorating the attack itself, but recognizing the demonstration of forgiveness and redemption that followed. Tourists often asked their guides about the story behind it. The tale had become part of the site's modern history alongside its ancient legends Dottie had found stable employment with a construction company whose owner had been impressed by his honesty about his past and his commitment to maintaining sobriety. The work was physically demanding but gave him a sense of purpose and accomplishment that had been missing from his life for years. "I want to share something," Danny said during that evening's group session. 8 months ago, I was the kind of person who solved problems with violence and blamed everyone else for my failures. I attacked someone who was just doing his job, someone who had never done anything to hurt me. The group listened intently, familiar with Danny's story, but always interested in his evolving perspective on the events that had changed both his and Michael's lives. "What I learned that night wasn't about forgiveness," Danny continued. "It was about choice. Even in my worst moment, when I had every reason to expect punishment or revenge, Michael chose to see me as a person worth saving. And then he gave me the chance to choose who I wanted to be going forward." Michael nodded, recognizing the growth in Danny's understanding of that pivotal evening. The former attacker had evolved from someone consumed by anger and self-pity into a person who took responsibility for his actions and worked to help others avoid similar mistakes. After the group session ended, 2 men walked together toward the underground station, their friendship now a natural part of both their lives. The extraordinary circumstances of their first meeting had given way to mutual respect, based on shared commitment to personal growth and helping others. "Any regrets about how you handled things that night?" Danny asked as they reached the station entrance. Michael considered the question, thinking about the alternative paths that evening could have taken. "Only one," he said finally. "I regret that it took someone hitting me with a bottle to realize how much good we could do by treating people's pain instead of just their symptoms." Their story had become a quiet legend among both military personnel and social workers, demonstrating that even the most violent encounters could become opportunities for healing and transformation when approached with courage, compassion, and wisdom. The broken glass had been swept away within hours, but the impact of their meeting would continue influencing lives for years to come.